Hello, everyone. Konstantin is here, and today I want to talk with you about cloud solutions, or more specifically, of Once Enterprise features that allow you to build these kind of solutions. And of course, it's not the complete overview or in-depth review of everything cloud related. That's just a short, superficial overview of platform features, just the basic knowledge that will give you an opportunity to look into it and maybe start building your own cloud solution. So let's say we have some simple application, something like the one that we developed in our video business application in 5 minutes that you can check out on our YouTube channel. And it's a pretty simple one. You have products that you sell and that you buy and then sell, and you want to register your purchases and your sales. You have some brands list and you have some inventory, so you could remember what products you have left in your possession, so you don't oversell, you don't sell something you don't have. And this is pretty much it. And if we look at the inside of the application, it's again, very simple one, 2 catalogs, 2 documents, couple of enumerations, 1 information register that stores the prices of our products, and the accumulation register that tracks the amount we have left. And this is pretty much it. Now, let's think for a moment, what do we need to make this application a cloud one? Well, first of all, we need to provide our users with the access to the application from the internet. And our users should be able to use browser to access the application. And as most of you probably already know, it's a pretty simple task. If you work with the Once Enterprise platform, you just go here, click Publish to web server, and basically this is it. Now I can open the browser window, type in this the name of my application, its URL, and my application is instantly available from the internet. And as you can see, its interface is pretty much the same as the one that we saw with the native client. So this is all good stuff. But is this enough? No, not even close. Of course, when I say cloud application, I mean much more than just being able to access my application from the browser. When I say cloud, I mean that I want different users or even different companies working with my application from the internet. So let's start with adding a few users to the application, and we get to the different companies later on. So as you know, to add users, to start adding users, I need to add at least 1 role first, and let's call it full access, because access rights consideration are not the topic of today's discussion. So I'm just creating a single role, and I give it a full access to everything I have inside of my application without even thinking about it. And then I create 2 users belonging to this role. So let's say we have Admiral James T. Kirk as our first user. And it belongs to this role. And we have Darth Vader as our second user. Now I can launch the application under the Darth Vader name and start making some purchases as a Darth Vader, and it will work just fine. And if I launch the same application as a different user, which is James Kirk, again, I will see the same interface, and what's more important, I will see the same data, and when one user adds something, the second one can see it, and vice versa. It's perfectly fine as long as these two users work for the same company, which is not the case because, as you all know, Darth Vader works for a Star Wars company and James Kirk works for a Star Trek company. So basically, these are two different companies. That should have different purchase documents and different everything, and they should not be able to see each other's document. So we need to split these data somehow. And the most obvious way of doing that would be just create two separate databases for Star Trek company and for Star Wars company, and then let different users work separately in their own databases. This will work to some extent because when you host this kind of a service, you actually need to host these different applications for different companies. And when we are talking about the simple application like this one, it doesn't take much from your hardware, from your service, from your infrastructure. But when the application grows and it gets bigger, for example, when it's as complex as OneC Drive, for example, it will take up to 250 megabytes in the memory of your server. So you can make the calculation yourself. And when you have 10 clients, it will be 2.5 gigabytes. And when you have 100 clients, it's 25 gigabytes. And you can forget about ever having 1,000 clients because that's just out of reach. And you will need way too much memory, and it will cost you way too much to make this feasible from the business perspective. You will spend too much money for this kind of infrastructure, for this kind of hosting. So this will be too expensive, and this will never work. And this is why, to make this work, we need to introduce some different kind of solution, a different concept. And this is the concept of multi-tenancy, which is when you have many companies, also known as tenants, who share the same application. And this way, the application gets loaded into the memory only once, but different companies work with it at the same time, and it's much less demanding in terms of hardware and especially the memory of your servers. But this way, we will need to come up with the solution of dividing the data of these different tenants, so one tenant cannot see what others are doing. And again, there are several different options of how you can do that. For example, we have our products catalog, and we could split different tenants into different tables. And one tenant's products will be stored in table products 1, and second tenant's will be stored in table products 2, and so on. This is one way of doing that, but OneC Enterprise went a different route, and what we did instead is we split the table into areas belonging to different tenants. And basically, we are adding a new attribute to every split table, and this attribute tells whose this specific record belongs to, which tenant it belongs to. So let's see how we can do that using OneC Enterprise. And these attributes that could serve as a splitters, as a dividers between different data areas, they live here in common attributes. So let's try and add a new attribute called tenant. And let's give it a type string and length 50. And the thing about these common attributes is that they don't belong to any specific metadata object of the bat, but we can decide and assign it to any numbers of different metadata objects, and this way to separate them with a single attribute at once. So now let's, for example, separate the purchases and sales documents using this new common attribute called tenant. And I'm opening the purchases document settings, and here in the data tab there is a button called common attributes, and this is our tenant. And if I want to include this attribute into the data structure of this document, I just set it to use like so, and then I do the same for the sales documents. Common attributes, use, and this is it. But, first, let me show you how it works without the data separation. So I will just add this attribute and fill it out with some data, but without really separating records of the purchases and sales documents into different tenants. So I'm going to the document form, and I'm gonna add this tenant attribute to the form like so. Same with the list form. Tenant goes here, and same for the sales document forms. And the property of common attribute that controls this splitting behavior lives here. It's called data separation, and at this point it's set to do not use. So let's set it to split. And at this point the platform suggests adding session parameters for this data separator that we just added. I will talk about it a little bit later. For now, let's just agree to the suggestion, and this is what happened. Now we got a bunch of new settings that weren't accessible before that, and one of them is called usage of split data, and we have two options here: independent and shared. Let's select the second one, and again I will explain the difference between them a little bit later. But to start with, independent means that the data will be separated. All tables that include this common attribute will be separated, so records will belong to one or another data area or tenant in our case. And shared does not mean that we share the same data in any form, but we share the value of the separator, the value of this tenant attribute. So we just expose this value. We do not hide it. This is what it's supposed to mean. So now the next question is how we tell the application which user belongs to which tenant, right? We need somehow to split our users between different tenants. And again, this setting lives here, and it's called user separation. So I'm setting it to split. And what happens now, as soon as I save my changes, is this new tab appears in the user settings. And using this new tab, I can tell which tenant each user belongs to. So Darth Vader goes to Star Wars Company, and James Kirk should go to Star Trek Company. But when I try to do that, this is what happens. Okay, so platform tells me that I'm about to lose all ability to change user lists or access rights for my application, which is unacceptable, of course. And to avoid this, I need to add another user, which I will call admin. And I won't associate this user with any tenant, so I'm going to leave this field empty, and I will give it a full access as well. And now I can say that James Kirk belongs to Star Trek separator. Okay, as simple as that. And let's see what happens when I try to log in, let's say, as Darth Vader. As soon as I did that, I can open purchases documents, and as you can see, out of 3 documents that I had here in the list, I can see only 1 belonging to my tenant, and 2 others are gone. Well, they're still in the database, but I cannot see them. Now let's try and log in as James Kirk. Open purchase documents, and now we can see the 2 documents that belong to the Star Trek tenant, and we cannot see the 3rd one that belongs to Star Wars. Okay, so this is how data separation works. Another interesting question: what happens if I log in as admin? Well, let's just check. So I'm selecting admin, and this is what I see. Admin does not belong to any tenant and has full access, so he's able to see all the data across all separators. Okay, and this is how this separation mode works. Now let's check what changes when we decide to split data completely independently. Basically, what I just did is I hid the tenant value from anywhere. So anybody working with the application just does not know what tenant he's working in and what other tenants there are in the database. So first of all, when I log into the application as somebody who has access to his part of data, for example, Darth Vader has access to this one document. I cannot see the document, but I lost the tenant value. I cannot see it anymore. It used to be here, but the platform hid it from me, so I cannot see what tenant I'm working in. And if I log in as an admin, I cannot see anything inside of this list. So all documents are hidden because I don't belong to any tenant and I have no right to see any data here. So this is the difference between independent separation and independent and shared separation. Mode of splitting the data you decide to use depends completely on the task in hand and on the level of secrecy you want to support for your users. For my today's demonstration, I will leave independent and shared mode. And let's see what else is worth mentioning. One more interesting feature is the common attribute type, because as you can see right here, we could select a whole bunch of different types of data, including numbers and even including referential types. So if I can use a reference to a catalog as a data separator, maybe I could create a new catalog and list all my tenants, all my companies I work with inside of this catalog and use the reference to these catalog items as a data separator, which would be very convenient, obviously. So let's try to do that. So I'm creating a new catalog like this. Let's call it tenants. Now I need to change tenant value type as well. I will explain it a little bit later. So tenants. And now I will change this type to tenants catalog. Let's check if this all works. Okay, so we have two warnings because the data type just changed for the users that we have. But the worse news is that we lost ability to assign our users to our tenants. And even though we can create items in this new catalog, for example, let's create Star Wars item and Star Trek item right here. Star Trek item right here. So I have these two companies, but I no longer can assign company to a user. And the reason for that is that now the list of tenants, the list of data separators, data separator values live in the data, right, in the database. But we are in the designer, and designer has no access to data whatsoever. And even if I create those tenants as predefined records of this new catalog, it won't help. So I still won't be able to select one of those catalog items as a tenant value for my users. And this is where we should look into these two session parameters that were added by the platform automatically and were also assigned as data separation value and data separation usage settings properties of our common attribute. So the thing about those parameters is that when we had tenant as a string and each user has its own predefined string as a tenant, when we launch application, the tenant value for these for the current session would show what company we are working with, what company this user belongs to. Okay, and vice versa, this works other way around. We could use this session module and these session parameter settings procedure to set up to assign a value to this tenant value session parameter, and this will define which tenant and which data area we work in. But to make this work, we would obviously need our own catalog of users separate from this system list that the platform provides us with. And in this catalog, we would set up the connection between users and tenants. And then when a specific user logs in to the system, we would check inside of this catalog, get the value of the tenant and use its reference as a separator, which is completely doable and not even this complex. And as for the tenant use session parameter, we can use it to switch on or off the separation of data completely, which can be useful because sometimes we want to work with the entirety of the data without separation, and sometimes we don't. And more specifically, we want some users to be able to work with the entirety of data and some users to be able to work only inside their data area and not see anything outside of it. So this is a very brief overview of this functionality and the main principle it based upon. And if you want to if you're interested and if you want to move further and deeper into this area, I want just to name a few directions you might like to look at. And the first direction would be the standard subsystem library, which already has many things implemented for us. For example, what I just mentioned, the users list, they have it, of course, and it supports data separation. So you can just grab users subsystem from the subsystem library and it will be very useful for your applications. Another big thing to think about is
how we actually build the rest of the service. Because even when we have our application ready and there are data separators inside of it and everything works fine, we still have a lot of things to implement. For example, how we register tenants. Obviously, we need some kind of a site, right? A website where user can register to sign up for our service. We need a payment method. We need to know who this user is and what he has access to or does not have access to. So a lot of infrastructure needs to be built on top of the application that we already have. And there are quite complex solutions already exist in this area, and one of them would be a product called Once Fresh, which is another proprietary tool that Once company provides. And unfortunately, it does not exist in English so far, but we're working on it, and in the future, we hope it will be available. And what it does, it provides you with the entire infrastructure of controlling, of managing your service. And using this tool, you can, for example, specify what subscription plans you have, and you can have different subscription plans with different features or even different applications, because you can host many different applications in the same cloud. So it's a very useful tool, and please tell us if you want these to be available in English, and we will try to speed up the translation process. And another interesting question would be how to retrofit the existing application to make it work in the cloud mode, how to add these data separators into the existing metadata structure when the application is big and contains a lot of functionality and stuff like that. And the honest answer is that it's not easy but doable. So we are starting to work on our own applications to make them work in this cloud mode. But the best approach would be to start thinking about cloudness of your application off the bat, right when you start designing it and thinking of what metadata object it should contain and what functionality it should have. This way it will be much easier in the long run. So you create common attributes, separators, data separators from the beginning, and then you start add functional metadata object and think about each object. Should it be separated or not, and how exactly it will be used by different users. So this is the thing that is better think of at the beginning of the process than in the end or after the functionality is complete. And of course, as you can see, we barely scratched the surface of this topic, because there are a lot of things involved into it, and there are many different tasks that should be solved differently. So if you are interested in this, please let me know, email me, and I will redirect you into some documentation or into some useful tools, or we will discuss it between us, and hopefully I will help you to find a correct direction for your future cloud solutions. And yeah, this is basically it, and thank you very much for coming and for listening. And yeah, if you have any questions, please let me know.